Okay, I'm gonna walk through smooth muscle fairly quickly because while it's important that you understand the distinction between skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle, as I've mentioned, a majority of your exam is over the skeletal muscle PowerPoint. And also we gotta get into naming all the muscles. And so we're gonna do that next week. If you have noticed, if you've been paying any type of attention to your module, I actually took out the whole muscle contraction PowerPoint because while it's great information, it's really unnecessary for us to go through it. And I didn't want to. So here is your smooth muscle PowerPoint. Wait, there, okay, here we go. Is your smooth muscle PowerPoint. All right, let's make it big. There's 40 slides. I'm going to skip through a lot, but you should probably go through and look at the information. I just don't need to read charts to you or anything like that. So smooth muscle found in the walls of most hollow organs except the heart. Let's do it this way. There we go. Let's do it this way. There we go. Then, of course, the heart contains cardiac muscle, which is neither skeletal or smooth muscle tissue. It is its own muscle tissue. We don't talk about cardiac muscle until the spring semester in 2402. And I think it's your third topic because we go respiratory system, I'm pretty sure, and then endocrine and blood are kind of talked about together. And then blood leads into vascular, the cardiovascular system. So we'll talk about cardiac muscle then. But your smooth muscle is found in the walls of most hollow organs. Think of your body. What's a hollow organ? Right, most of your organs. We got the liver and the stomach and the uterus and the bladder. Not all of you have a uterus, obviously. And other hollow organs. There you go. Ooh, and all of your blood vessels except for the very, very smallest ones. So spindle-shaped fibers. A spindle, if you don't know, is something that is kind of fat in the middle and gets really pointed at the ends. Thin and short compared to skeletal muscle fibers. You can read. It does not have striation. It lacks connective tissue, but it does contain that endomysium. So if you recall in skeletal muscles, the whole muscle bundle, the whole thing, like let's take your bicep, the whole thing has a paramysium. And then you get down and each individual fascicle, if you remember, is lots of muscle fibers bundled together, has a myomysium. And then each individual myofibril, terminology, has an endomysium. Smooth muscle just has an endomysium. Okay. All the blood vessels, except for the very smallest ones, which are capillaries, contain smooth muscle, organized into two layers of opposing sheets of fiber. The reason it is in opposing sheets of fiber is because it's harder to tear when you have things running opposite each other, which is very important in our blood vessels. You don't want those tearing. So the longitudinal layer, run parallel along the blood vessel. And so the contraction, like when your heart pumps and you have that systolic pressure, it causes the organ to shorten. And then you have a circular layer that runs around the circumference. Then this allows the lumen of the organ to constrict. So think of your EMT training right now and think about how you can talk about hypothermia and hyperthermia and or muscle as sprains and injuries where you either talk about vasoconstriction or vasodilation. What is constricting and dilating will be the circular layer of that blood vessel or organ. Okay, so peristalsis, you all should know this term by now, I would hope. But peristalsis is alternating contractions and relaxations that you have no control over. This is what moves food down your esophagus past that first inch or so that is innervated. I'm sorry, it's all innervated, but is innervated with skeletal muscle right here. And then the rest is innervated with with neuromuscular junctions right here, duh. And then the rest is innervated with vascular bundles of the parasympathetic nervous system that you don't control. And so it squeezes and relaxes and squeezes and relaxes. And if you ever have something that's too large going down, you can feel it, how it gets stuck, but then it'll move down and how it gets stuck. And you feel it actually all the way to the esophageal sphincter that leads to the stomach. And once it passes through the sphincter, you don't feel it anymore. Peristalsis is also happening in your small and large intestines to move the chyme through the small intestine and move the waste through the large intestine as it's becoming desiccated because your body is reabsorbing the water. And then it also helps in defecating. You need the peristalsis for all of that. So there you go. So peristalsis and all your hollow organs. Remember, we are a tube within a tube system. We are a deuterostome, which you should remember from 1407. We form the anus first, but then we have a mouth. And between the mouth and anus, you are connected through a tubular system. And then the skeleton and muscle surrounding that is the second tube. So the esophagus, the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, the spleen, the small intestine, the large intestine, and the rectum and anus are all hollow organs that have smooth muscle. Cross section of the intestine, we see those. This is pregnancy brain, by the way. Anyway, it doesn't matter what the things that absorb food on the inside. Then you have the circular layer of circumferential layer of muscular smooth muscle tissue. And then you have the longitudinal layer of smooth muscle tissue. And you can see how that looks right here. This is as if you took one of those spindle shapes and cut it directly in half is what you're seeing in the longitudinal layer. You're cutting all the muscle cells in half and you're looking down the middle. And then in the circumferential layer, of course, they're all laying on their side going in a circle. Okay. So there's no neuromuscular junctions like there are in skeletal muscles. There's no, acetylcholine transversing across to activate T-tubules to make calcium flow out. None of that. You don't have control over your hollow organs like you do your muscle tissue. So autonomic nerve fighters, or auto is self, and the nomic actually means auto. So auto self innervate the smooth muscles. And instead of a neuromuscular junction, you get varicosities. And so this is what varicosities look like. Now, you might have heard of things called varicose veins, which are similar as to varicosities, but those are veins, right? And they're swellings in the legs typically of obese people or people who have diabetes or people who have circulation problems for some reason. Hold on just 1 second. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. A substitute teacher had some questions, so we have to help them when we can because they're not told anything about the jobs that they're doing. Okay. I wanted to go back to the previous slide real quick to show you that varicosities do store and release neurotransmitters, and it's a wide synaptic cleft. And so instead of having a very narrow area where that acetylcholine will go through as in skeletal muscle, this is kind of a diffusion process across a wide area. Smooth muscle does not have T-tubules. Myofibrils are sarcomeres. You're not in any kind of control. That sarcoplasmic reticulum is also less developed, but it still does store calcium. But most of that is used for contraction. That is used for contraction has extracellular organs. And here is a word that you don't need to know, but calveolae, pouch-like enfoldings for the calcium to diffuse into the cell. So here's a relaxed muscle fiber. Gap junctions, if you recall, are junctions in between cells so that ions can flow from one cell to the other directly. So obviously your hollow organ smooth muscle is very tightly connected. It's a tight junction. There's no fluids leaking out of these hollow organs, or then something would be horribly wrong. And so they're tight junctions, which means, they're basically, they're pressed together as much as possible There is no room in between the cells. And then you have the gap junctions there. Okay. The rest of it is just differences. Their thick filaments are fewer, so they have myosin, they have less myosin, but myosin heads along the entire length. There's no troponin. They do have tropomyosin to bind the actin heads, and calmodulin is what is now going to bind to calcium and move the tropomyosin out of the way, so the myosin can bind to the actin. The rest, okay, just whatever. Here is a contracted muscle, smooth muscle fiber here. So there you go. And these are the charts I'm not going to read to you. They're all, you need to know this information. It's beautiful information. And it's great to show you the differences between smooth and cardiac and skeletal muscle. The epimysium, paramysium, endomysiums. Here the cardiac only has endomysium and the smooth only has endomysium. And then these are how they are innervated. So in the skeletal muscle, you have those neuromuscular junctions, and the smooth muscle, you have varicosities. And then in the cardiac muscle, you have the pacemaker setting the electrical signal. And then as the electrical signal passes through the heart, it travels through the intercalated discs from cell to cell and makes that, the top atrium pump relax, the ventricles pump relax. And that is a totally different system there. Skeletal is voluntary, cardiac and smooth are both involuntary. And here is more information for you. Okay. Smooth muscle are slow, synchronized contractions. You should not feel them. When you feel them, we call them cramps, specifically in our lower intestines and everything. And that means that you have put your body under some sort of duress. Either you've eaten food that your body is not agreeing with, and or you have stored feces for too long and your body is having trouble. And of course you can have cramps because of, females' periods. That is because the uterus itself is actually contracting and releasing. That's where period cramps come from. And it does affect your digestion system as well, as you probably all know. And then what is the other reason? Oh, illness. We can be ill, and those are called stomach cramps as well. So the action potentials jump from fiber to fiber through the gap junctions. Some cells are self-excitatory, but that's fine. You don't need to know that. The way it's similar to skeletal muscle is that actin and myosin do the sliding filament mechanism, and it's triggered by an increase of calcium level. And of course, ATP has to be utilized, and then contraction stops when calcium is no longer available and is stored back in that smooth and sarcoplasmic reticulum, excuse me. The mechanism of contraction, I'm not super worried about you knowing for smooth muscle. I'm much more focused on you knowing skeletal muscle, but if you were interested, here is a series of steps for you to understand how the contraction works. It's similar, but it's different. Calcium floods in from the cytosol or the extracellular fluid, which is what ECF stands for, via voltage-gated or non-voltage-gated calcium channels, or from the scant sarcoplasmic reticulum. So you have multiple ways to get calcium into the cell. The calcium binds to calmodulin. The activated calmodulin activates the myosin kinase enzymes. The activated kinase enzymes catalyze transfer of a phosphate, activating the myosin ATP. See, I don't really need you to know this. And then we do the thin and thick filaments here with the cross-bridge sliding formation. Meh, don't need to know that so much. I probably should focus on neurotransmitters and hormones, but I'm not gonna. Okay, so special features of smooth muscle contraction: it can respond to stretch. It responds to stretch only briefly, then adapts to a new length, and it can still contract on demand. This enables organs that are temporary holders, like the stomach, which can only hold, for most on average, a maximum of 16 ounces. Okay, so you can overload your stomach, and bladder, which can store up to 2 cups of urine, and 2 cups is also 16 ounces. So it allows them to respond to that stretch of putting too much in them, but then they will go back to their normal size once you relieve them. Either you digest the food out of your stomach or throw it up, and then also you urinate. And length and tension can change. You have types of smooth muscle. It's either categorized as unitary or multi-unit. And they are different by fiber arrangement, innervation, which is how they are activated by neurons, and responsiveness to various stimuli. Sorry. Unitary smooth muscle is visceral muscle found in all hollow organs except the heart. So stomach, bladder, small intestines, sorry. They got the longitudinal and circular sheets. They got the viscosities. They have spontaneous action potentials that are coupled by gap reactions, but gap junctions, so they can jump from cell to cell, and they respond to various chemical stimuli. Multi-unit is large airways in the lungs, large arteries, so your inferior and superior. Nope, that's the vena cava. Those are veins. The aorta, the cephalic and abdominal aorta as well. The erector pili muscles and your skin that causes goosebumps, and the iris of the eye, which we know can dilate or contract the pupil. Very few gap junctions. Spontaneous depolarization is rare. Similar to skeletal muscle in that they have independent muscle fibers. They have motor units, but it's still the autonomic nervous system and not the voluntary nervous system. And they have graded contractions, which, okay, was part of the whole muscle contraction PowerPoint. Just know that there's different levels of threshold that your muscles can reach, and which can cause constant contraction. We would call that a cramp, and that's not a good thing. Which can cause a twitch, which is contraction is shorter than the relaxation phase to get there, and then others and others and others, whatever. It is different because it's controlled by the autonomic nervous system and hormones. Developmental aspects. I guess the only really interesting thing here, but not necessarily some information you have to keep in your head, is that your cardiac muscle cells start pumping in an embryo at 3 weeks old of that embryo. And I don't know if that means 3 weeks of being an embryo or a 3-week-old embryo, which is actually only a 1-week-old embryo because it took 2 weeks to be fertilized and become a ball of cells called a blastula, and then become embedded into the uterine wall. So that's very interesting if they are actually talking about a 5-week-old embryo or like an actual 3-week-old embryo. And I want to say they're talking about a 5-week-old embryo if you count the 2 weeks it takes for the blastula to be formed and embed, because until the blastula is embedded, it is not called an embryo. So interesting. The smooth muscle cells come from the mesodermic cells in the embryo, okay? Regeneration of muscle, this is probably important to you as EMTs more than anything. Skeletal muscle satellite cells have limited regenerative ability. You can tear a muscle, it can heal, it takes a while. Cardiomyocytes can divide at a modest rate, but injured heart muscle is mostly replaced by connective tissue, and scarred connective tissue at that. So your heart becomes less efficient at pumping. It becomes more, not brittle. Brittle's the wrong word, but it doesn't have the mechanism, the ability to stretch as it pumps anymore. It becomes more rigid. Smooth muscle tissue regenerates throughout life, which makes sense because all of our hollow organs, if you think about it, are constantly experiencing friction, right? So friction will be constantly sloughing off cells, and so you'll need to replace them. Cardiac and skeletal muscle lengthen and grow and thicken in a growing child, but they have to stop, or if they don't, you're going to be hypertrophic, which means you'll have a heart that is too large and is inefficient at pumping blood, or you'll have a skeleton that is too large for the heart. And those people who have hypertrophy typically don't live full lives. And then there's, more things. And then aging also changes aspects of your muscles as well, which was and is still one of your questions to answer. You have a quiz and then you have a question about aging for this week. Muscular dystrophy is a group of inherited muscle destroying diseases. It's inherited, it's genetic, so you're born with it. They generally appear in childhood. Muscles enlarge, but then atrophy and degenerate. You see these children and also adults in motorized wheelchairs. They don't have any voluntary muscle movement. Stephen Hawking did not have muscular dystrophy, but what did he have? You probably know more than I do. Let me see real quick. He had ALS, so he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease. So that is a nervous system disorder, not a muscular disorder. And then you have Duchenne muscular dystrophy, also a genetic disorder that is inherited an X-linked trait carried by females and expressed in males, because males don't have the double X to make up for one of the genes being abnormal. So if the X is mutated, then that will show up in males, like red-green color blindness typically does. And it is severe. It's the severe form of muscular dystrophy, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Oh, there's more. There's more. Wow, there's more. Read all the things that can go wrong in the smooth muscle. Oh, screen sharing has stopped. Okay, so that's smooth muscle. You can tell how enthused I am about it. Yes. Okay, read through the PowerPoint if you don't want to listen to me, which you have to get to the end of the video to hear me say that. So, ha 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 ha. Have a good day.